At my husband's company gala, the guard glanced at me and said, "Sorry, guests wait outside." Inside, my husband smirked, whispering, "You wouldn't fit in here anyway." Every other spouse sat proudly beside their partner. I watched him laugh with his assistant, then quietly opened my phone, sent one message to the board and walked out as everything began to unravel. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back. This is a private event." The security guard at the Meridian Grand Hotel placed his hand on my shoulder, physically moving me away from the entrance where my husband Owen had just walked through, laughing with his assistant Natalie. I stood there in my emerald dress, watching through the glass as every other spouse took their seats at decorated tables while I was left standing in the corridor like hired help. The humiliation burned, but what hurt more was that I'd seen this moment coming for weeks, maybe months. The signs had been there in our cramped Boston apartment, in the way Owen had started treating my contributions to his work like they were expected rather than extraordinary. Just this morning, I'd woken at 4:30 a.m. while Emma still slept, opening Owen's laptop to review his quarterly presentation for Vertex Industries. The budget projections were wrong, off by $3 million due to a formula error that would have made him look incompetent in front of the board. I fixed it as I always did, adding the corrected graphs and updating the data visualizations that would make him shine. If you believe talented women deserve recognition for their work, not erasure, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps share these important stories. Now let's see how Lucy reclaims her power. 3 years ago, I was the one standing at podiums presenting my supply chain algorithms to packed conference rooms. Owen would sit in the front row taking notes, asking me afterward to explain the technical details he didn't quite grasp. Now those same algorithms, refined and perfected through countless late nights at our kitchen table, were being presented as his innovations. The irony wasn't lost on me as I stood in this corridor, that the very systems keeping Vertex Industries competitive were created by someone who wasn't even allowed in their celebration. Emma's 7th birthday last week had been the first crack in my carefully maintained composure. She'd been talking about the robotics kit for months, showing me pictures from the catalog, explaining how she would build a robot that could help mommy with her coding. When Owen arrived 2 hours late with a generic drugstore card and a chocolate bar, her face fell in a way that broke something inside me. "Daddy forgot," she said quietly, and Owen just shrugged, muttering about being busy with important work stuff. The important work stuff I knew was my work. The algorithm I'd developed to optimize Vertex's inventory management, the predictive modeling system that had saved them millions, the automated reporting dashboard that Owen couldn't even explain without my notes. While he was supposedly too busy to remember his daughter's birthday, I'd seen the Uber receipts for downtown restaurants, always for two, always at places I'd never been. The Cartier receipt had been my confirmation. I'd found it 3 weeks ago while doing laundry, tucked into his gym bag like he'd forgotten it was there. $8,000 for a watch. The same week he'd told me we couldn't afford Emma's summer science camp, the one focused on coding for kids, the one that would have given her the education I wished I could provide myself if I wasn't so exhausted from doing Owen's job plus my own consulting work just to keep us afloat. My mother had tried to warn me last month. She'd called late on a Tuesday night, her voice careful and measured. "Lucy dear, I saw Owen today. In Cambridge at that French restaurant you mentioned wanting to try." My heart had stopped because Owen was supposedly in Chicago for a critical client meeting. "He was with someone," she continued. "That pretty blonde from his office. The one from the Christmas party. Natalie Frost. 26 years old, Harvard MBA, hired as Owen's assistant 6 months ago. I'd met her exactly once at that Christmas party, where she'd looked through me like I was furniture while gushing about Owen's brilliance. Now through the ballroom glass I watched her lean into him, her hand on his arm, wearing the Cartier watch I'd found the receipt for. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through our joint credit card statements. There they were, charges I'd overlooked in my trust. The Ritz-Carlton downtown on nights he was working late. Dinner for two at restaurants he told me were client meetings. A jewelry store charge from yesterday that he hadn't even bothered to hide. The pattern was clear, laid out in transaction history like a map of betrayal. "Excuse me, ma'am, you need to move further back," the security guard said again, more forcefully this time. Through the glass, Owen turned and our eyes met. For a moment his expression flickered, surprise, maybe even shame. But then he leaned toward Natalie and said something that made her look at me and laugh. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read his lips clearly. You wouldn't fit in here anyway. 7 years. 7 years of waking before dawn to fix his mistakes, of sacrificing my career so he could build his, of being told we needed to invest in his future because it was our future. I'd believed him when he said that once he made senior VP I could restart my career, maybe even launch my own consulting firm. I'd trusted him when he said my support was temporary, that we were building something together. But standing in that corridor watching him toast his success with champagne I'd never tasted, surrounded by colleagues who didn't even know I existed, I understood the truth. I wasn't his partner. I was his unpaid employee, his invisible advantage, the brain he borrowed while keeping all the credit, and now apparently the younger, blonder upgrade on his arm. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma's babysitter. She's asking when you'll be home to practice coding with her. Another promise I'd have to break because I'd spent the afternoon preparing Owen's Monday presentation while he was supposedly at the office but actually, according to his location services, at Natalie's apartment. I looked once more through those glass doors at the world I'd helped build but would never be welcomed into, then turned and walked toward the exit, my heels echoing in the empty corridor. The next morning arrived with a doorbell that shouldn't have been ringing at 7 a.m. I opened it to find Natalie Frost standing in our hallway, her cream-colored designer suit pristine against the peeling paint of our apartment building's corridor. She held a leather folder and wore that same Cartier watch, her perfume, something expensive and French, filling our entryway. I need Owen's signature on these quarterly reports, she said, already pushing past me without invitation. Her eyes swept our living room with barely concealed disdain, taking in the second-hand couch, Emma's toys scattered on the worn carpet, the stack of coding books I used as a makeshift monitor stand. He forgot to sign them yesterday when we were reviewing the presentation. I stood there in my old MIT sweatshirt, the one with the coffee stain I hadn't had time to wash, watching her manicured fingers tap against the folder. She moved through our space like she belonged there more than I did, her heels clicking against our scratched hardwood floors. Owen's in the shower, I said, keeping my voice level despite the rage building in my chest. She turned to me then, really looked at me for the first time, and her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. You know, Owen deserves so much better than this, she said, gesturing vaguely at our apartment. But her eyes stayed on me when she said it, and we both knew she wasn't talking about our living situation. Better than what? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Someone who understands his world. His ambitions. She set the folder on our coffee table, right on top of the algorithm sketches I'd been working on for Owen's next project. Someone who can stand beside him at events, not wait in parking lots. The reference to last night's humiliation was deliberate, calculated. She knew I'd been turned away. Of course she did, she'd probably suggested the guest list herself. After she left with Owen's signatures, obtained while I stood in the kitchen pretending not to notice how his hand lingered on hers during the handoff, Emma came padding out of her bedroom. She was already dressed for school, her backpack dragging behind her. "Mommy, why doesn't Daddy come to my school stuff anymore?" she asked over breakfast, pushing her cereal around the bowl. "Lily's dad came to the science fair yesterday. And Marcus's dad helps with reading time." I didn't have an answer that wouldn't break her heart. Owen had missed her last 3 school events, including the parent-teacher conference where Mrs. Patterson had specifically requested both parents attend to discuss Emma's advanced placement in mathematics. "Daddy's very busy with work, sweetheart," I managed, the lie tasting bitter. Mrs. Patterson pulled me aside at drop-off that morning, her expression concerned. "Mrs. Mercer, I need to update our emergency contact information. Your husband called yesterday and said if we can't reach you we should call Ms. Frost. He said she's his executive assistant and could handle any emergencies." The floor seemed to shift beneath me. He did what? He also mentioned she might be picking Emma up occasionally. "I wanted to verify with you first, of course." I felt sick. Natalie Frost, who'd stood in my living room hours ago telling me I wasn't enough, was now on my daughter's emergency contact list. The violation of it, the presumption, the careful planning behind Owen's back. It all crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity. That evening, while Owen showered after another late meeting, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. I knew his passcode, Emma's birthday ironically, and what I found destroyed any remaining delusions about my marriage. Text after text between him and Natalie, planning their future together, Once his situation was handled. That's what I was now. Not a wife, not a partner. A situation requiring handling. Can't wait until we don't have to hide anymore, Natalie had written. Soon, Owen had replied. After the promotion goes through. Lucy won't fight it if I frame it right. She never fights anything. My phone rang then, startling me. It was Owen, panicking from his office. Lucy, thank God. The algorithm's malfunctioning. The entire inventory system is showing errors, and I have the board presentation tomorrow morning. You have to fix this. Please. The desperation in his voice would have moved me once. Now it just sounded like opportunity. I drove to our apartment's makeshift office, really just a corner of our bedroom, and logged into Vertex's system remotely. The error was simple, a corrupted database entry that had cascaded through the system. As I repaired it line by line, I made a decision. Deep within the code, in places Owen would never think to look, I began embedding my digital signature. Not just my initials or a timestamp, but complex cryptographic proof of authorship that only someone with advanced programming knowledge would recognize. Every function, every algorithm, every innovation I'd created now carried my hidden mark. If I ever needed to prove ownership, these breadcrumbs would lead directly back to me. Fixed, I told Owen over the phone an hour later. You're a lifesaver, he said, relief flooding his voice. I don't know what I'd do without you. Apparently you're figuring that out, I said quietly, but he'd already hung up. Margaret arrived an hour later, holding a bottle of wine and wearing the expression of someone delivering bad news. We'd been friends since college, and her husband Daniel worked in Vertex's accounting department. Lucy, I need to tell you something, she said, not even waiting until she was fully inside. Daniel overheard the executives yesterday. Owen's getting promoted to senior VP next month. That's good, I said mechanically, though nothing about Owen's success felt good anymore. There's more. Margaret poured us both wine with shaking hands. Natalie's being promoted too. Direct report to Owen, with a salary that's completely unprecedented for her experience level. Lucy, they're not even trying to hide it. Everyone knows. Everyone except the wife who'd built the very systems that made Owen valuable enough to promote. Everyone except the woman who'd sacrificed her own career, who'd spent countless nights debugging code while Owen slept, who'd created innovations that saved Vertex millions while receiving not even a mention in the company newsletter. I stared at the wine in my glass, dark red like the anger I'd been suppressing for months. Here's maybe. Margaret squeezed my hand, and in that moment I made a decision. I wouldn't be a situation to be handled. I wouldn't be the invisible woman behind Owen's success anymore. 2 weeks after Margaret's visit, the invitation arrived in our mailbox on a Thursday afternoon. Thick cream cardstock with gold embossing, the Vertex Industries logo gleaming at the top. I ran my finger over the text. Mr. Owen Mercer is cordially invited to the annual Vertex Industries Excellence Gala. Just his name. Not Mr. and Mrs. Mercer, not Owen Mercer and guest. Just him. I set it on the kitchen counter where Owen would see it, then picked up the phone and dialed his office. Grace answered on the second ring, her usually cheerful voice immediately becoming strained when she heard mine. Hi Grace, I'm calling about the gala invitation. There seems to be an error. It only has Owen's name. The silence stretched so long I thought the line had disconnected. Then I heard it. Natalie's distinctive laugh in the background, followed by her voice saying something about avoiding awkward situations. Mrs. Mercer, Grace finally said, her discomfort palpable through the phone. I'm so sorry, but Mr. Mercer specifically requested a solo invitation. He said it would be better for networking. Networking, I repeated flatly. I'm really sorry, Grace whispered, and I could hear genuine regret in her voice. I tried to suggest. It's not your fault, Grace. I hung up before she could apologize again. That evening, Owen barely glanced at the invitation before sliding it into his briefcase. Big night coming up, he said, not meeting my eyes. The board will all be there. Important for the promotion. I know, I said. I'm planning to attend. His head snapped up. Lucy, that's not. It's really more of a business thing. Every other spouse will be there, Owen. I checked with Margaret. Daniel got a +1 invitation. Your situation is different. He was already walking away, the conversation over in his mind. But it wasn't over in mine. That night, while Owen slept, I went to my closet and pulled out the emerald dress my mother had worn to her own company celebrations decades ago. She'd been a software engineer too back when women in tech were even rarer. The dress still fit perfectly, its deep green silk catching the light like liquid jade. The night of the gala, Owen left at 6, claiming he needed to arrive early for prep work. I waited until 7, then called an Uber. My hands were steady as I applied lipstick in the back seat, watching the city lights blur past. The driver glanced at me in the mirror. Special occasion? You could say that, I replied. The Meridian Grand Hotel rose before me like a golden monument to corporate excess. Valets rushed to open doors for couples in evening wear, and through the massive windows, I could see the ballroom glittering with crystal chandeliers and elaborate floral arrangements. I walked through the main entrance, my heels clicking against marble, and followed the signs to the gala. The security guard at the ballroom entrance was checking names on an iPad. When I approached, his expression was professionally blank. Name: Lucy Mercer. I'm Owen Mercer's wife. He scrolled, frowned, scrolled again. I'm not seeing you on the list, ma'am. There must be a mistake. I'm his spouse. I'm sorry, but if you're not on the list, you'll need to wait outside. These are the instructions I was given. His hand moved to my shoulder, firmly guiding me back from the entrance. Through the glass doors I could see everything. Round tables draped in white linen, executives laughing with their wives and husbands beside them. The mayor's wife sat at the head table. The CFO's husband was making a toast. And there, at a prominent table near the stage, sat Owen with Natalie beside him in a silver gown that caught the light like armor. Our eyes met through the glass. I saw him register my presence, saw the flash of panic quickly replaced by something harder. He leaned toward Natalie, whispered something. She turned to look at me, and I could read Owen's lips clearly as he spoke. You wouldn't fit in here anyway. Natalie's hand moved to his arm, proprietary and confident. She said something that made him laugh, and they both turned away, dismissing me as easily as the security guard had. My phone was in my hand before I consciously decided to pull it out. I began taking photos. Owen and Natalie together, her hand on his thigh under the table, the way he leaned into her when speaking. I documented the other couples, all seated together, proof that spouses were indeed welcome. My fingers flew across the screen, screenshotting the Vertex website's page about the gala being a celebration for employees and their families. Mrs. Mercer? Grace Chin materialized beside me, having rushed out of the ballroom. Her face was flushed, eyes wide with what looked like genuine distress. I'm so sorry about this. I tried to add you to the list, but Mr. Mercer explicitly. He explicitly what, Grace? She glanced around nervously, then leaned closer. He signed documents last month. Official papers stating that all the algorithmic innovations in his department were his sole creation. The board doesn't know about your contributions because legally, on paper, they don't exist. My blood turned to ice. He signed away my work? I wasn't supposed to see them, but I process all his paperwork. Grace's voice dropped even lower. He threatened my job when he realized I'd read them. Said if I ever mentioned your involvement in any project, he'd have me blacklisted from the industry. Grace, there's more. She was practically whispering now. The Caldwell project 3 years ago? The one that saved the company during the merger? I know you did that work. Mr. Blackwood specifically asked Owen how he'd developed such an elegant solution, and Owen said he'd been working on it solo for months. Harrison Blackwood, the chairman of the board. I looked through the glass again and found him at the head table, his silver hair distinguishable even from a distance. As if sensing my gaze, he glanced toward the doors. Our eyes met for a moment, and his expression shifted to puzzlement. He tilted his head slightly, a flicker of recognition crossing his features. 3 years ago, I'd done private consulting for Harrison through a third party, fixing a critical issue with his personal investment portfolio's algorithm. He'd never known it was me. The contract was under my maiden name, all communication through encrypted channels. But he'd praised the work as genius-level problem-solving. Now he was looking at Owen's wife standing outside his company's gala, and I could see wheels beginning to turn in his mind. Grace squeezed my arm gently. Mrs. Mercer, you deserve so much better than this. As she returned to the ballroom, I remained in the corridor, my phone heavy in my hand, filled with evidence of my humiliation. But humiliation was transforming into something else, something cold and precise and powerful. 7 years of suppressed rage crystallized into absolute clarity. I opened my email and began typing a message to Harrison Blackwood, attaching a single photo, the algorithm I'd created for his portfolio 3 years ago, with my digital signature embedded in the code. I sent the email to Harrison Blackwood with trembling fingers, then walked away from the Meridian Grand Hotel with my head high. The next morning I woke with a singular clarity. If I was going to reclaim my life, I needed proof that would be undeniable. Not just screenshots or hurt feelings, but evidence so comprehensive that Owen's carefully constructed lies would crumble like sand. The first thing I did was visit an electronics store downtown. The clerk, barely out of college, helped me select recording software that was legal in Massachusetts. Single-party consent meant I could record conversations I was part of. I paid cash, installed it on my laptop that afternoon while Owen was at work, and synced it to capture any conversation within range of his home office. For 3 months I became two people. By day I was the perfect wife Owen expected. I ironed his shirts with the same precision I'd once applied to debugging code, getting the creases exactly right. I cooked his favorite meals, the rosemary chicken he loved on Mondays, the pasta arrabbiata for Wednesdays, the steak with béarnaise sauce for Fridays when he'd worked late, but came home smelling of Natalie's perfume. I smiled when he kissed my cheek absently, pretended not to notice when he guarded his phone like a state secret. By night I was someone else entirely. After Owen fell asleep, I'd slip into his office and photograph every document he brought home. Contracts, presentations, financial reports, all of them built on my work. I'd return to our bedroom and upload everything to an encrypted cloud server I'd created, naming it Project Liberation. Each file was time-stamped, cataloged, and cross-referenced with the original code I'd written. The recordings were the most damaging. 2 weeks into my surveillance, I captured Owen on a call with Natalie, his voice carrying clearly through the office door I'd left strategically cracked. "Lucy's algorithm is what got me noticed," he said, laughing. "She has no idea I've been putting my name on everything. Too trusting. That's her problem, brilliant mind, no business sense. When are you going to tell her about us?" Natalie's voice was tinny through his phone speaker. "After the promotion locks in. I'll frame it as mutual differences. She won't fight it, she never fights anything." I stood in the hallway, my hand pressed to my mouth to muffle any sound, the recording app on my phone capturing every word. It was during the second month that Nexus Dynamics found me. Or rather, I found them without meaning to. Unable to sleep one night, I'd been browsing coding forums when I stumbled upon a challenge posted anonymously. "Solve this logistics optimization problem. Significant opportunity for the right mind." The problem was complex. A multivariable supply chain issue that most programmers would need days to untangle. But I recognized the pattern immediately. It was similar to something I'd solved for Owen 2 years ago, only with additional complexity layers. I couldn't help myself. My fingers flew across the keyboard, the familiar rush of problem-solving flooding through me. 2 hours later, I submitted my solution under a pseudonym. The next day, my personal phone rang with an unknown number. "Ms. Hawthorne." The voice was professional, confident. "This is Patricia Kelman, CEO of Nexus Dynamics. We posted that challenge and your solution was extraordinary." My heart stopped. I'd used my maiden name on the forum, but somehow she'd found me. "We've been watching your work for some time," Patricia continued. "The improvements you submitted to our public API 6 months ago? We know that was you. We'd like to offer you a position. Chief Innovation Officer, full recognition for all your work, and a starting salary of $450,000. I sank onto our bed, phone pressed to my ear. "You know about my situation? We know talent when we see it, regardless of whose name is on the paperwork. The offer stands when you're ready." The third month brought unexpected grief. I was organizing evidence files when an email arrived with a subject line that made my chest tighten. "Remembering Dr. Sarah Weiss. My MIT professor, my mentor, the woman who'd seen potential in me when I was just a scared freshman, had passed away." The obituary described her groundbreaking work in machine learning, her dedication to supporting women in technology, her belief that brilliance should never be hidden. Emma found me sobbing at the kitchen table, the obituary still glowing on my laptop screen. "Mommy, why are you crying?" I pulled her close, breathing in her shampoo scent. "Someone very important to me died, sweetheart." She believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. I believe in you, Mommy, Emma said solemnly. You're the smartest person I know. That night I renamed my evidence folder. No longer just Project Liberation, but Project Sarah, in honor of the woman who taught me that hiding brilliance was the greatest tragedy of all. Jennifer, my friend from law school who now practiced family law, met me at discreet coffee shops throughout those 3 months. She'd review my evidence with the careful attention she'd once applied to constitutional law studies. This recording is admissible, she said during our final meeting, listening to Owen's confession through earbuds. The embezzlement evidence is solid. The digital signatures on your code will hold up in court. Lucy, you have enough here to bury him professionally and legally. What about custody of Emma? With evidence of financial crimes and the way he's been hiding assets? You'll get primary custody easily. Jennifer squeezed my hand. When are you going to use all this? I thought about the gala invitation sitting in our kitchen drawer, the one addressed only to Owen. Soon. There's one more performance I need to give. That night I watched Owen pack his briefcase for the next day, humming off-key while organizing papers he didn't understand. He had no idea that every document had been photographed, every conversation recorded, every lie documented. He kissed my forehead absently, already thinking about tomorrow's meetings, about Natalie, about his promotion. Big week coming up, he said. Bigger than you know, I replied, but he was already walking away. I woke at 5 a.m. on the morning of the gala, my stomach tight with anticipation. Owen slept beside me, unaware that I'd spent the last 2 hours perfecting the email that would dismantle everything he'd built on my work. Each attachment was meticulously labeled. 2017 under 2019 under 3.8 am receiving SIP. 2024 under doc. 7 years of theft organized chronologically, with my digital signatures embedded throughout the code like fingerprints at a crime scene. The most damning piece sat at the top, a simple spreadsheet comparing Owen's promotion timeline with my creations. Every spike in his career corresponded exactly with something I'd built. The correlation was undeniable, the evidence overwhelming. Owen stirred at 6:30, reaching for his phone before his eyes fully opened. Big day, he murmured, scrolling through emails without looking at me. The biggest, I agreed, watching him from my pillow. He showered while I made his coffee, 2 sugars, splash of cream, exactly how he liked it. When he emerged, his cologne filled our bedroom, the expensive one Natalie had probably picked out. He pulled on his custom-tailored tuxedo, the one that cost more than Emma's entire year of after-school programs. You look nice, I said, meaning it. He did look nice. Like the successful executive he'd become on the foundation of my work. Thanks. He adjusted his cufflinks, the platinum ones I'd given him for our 5th anniversary back when I still believed in us. Listen, about tonight. You'll be working late. I know. He paused, perhaps hearing something in my tone. But then his phone buzzed. A text from Natalie, I assumed from the way his face lit up, and the moment passed. Don't wait up, he said, kissing my forehead with lips that felt like a stranger's. The gesture was automatic, meaningless, like signing a document without reading it. I won't, I promised. He left at 3 p.m., claiming he needed to review presentations before the gala. I watched from our bedroom window as his car disappeared around the corner, then opened my laptop. The email to Harrison Blackwood sat in my drafts, scheduled to send at exactly 8:47 p.m., right in the middle of Owen's anticipated promotion announcement. Subject line: The real architect of Vertex's success, urgent. The message itself was brief. Mr. Blackwood, you once praised my work as genius-level problem-solving. Tonight I'm solving one more problem. The attached documents prove that every innovation attributed to Owen Mercer was created by me, Lucy Hawthorne. The algorithms, the cost savings, the breakthrough solutions. All mine. I have recordings, code signatures, and documentation spanning 7 years. I thought you should know who really built your company's competitive advantage. A Hawthorne, formerly Mercer. Margaret arrived at 4 p.m. with a makeup bag and reinforcements in the form of Prosecco. Today we make you unforgettable, she announced, pulling me into our bathroom. She worked with the focus of an artist, contouring my cheekbones, defining my eyes with smoky shadow that made them look fierce rather than tired. When she finished with my face, she styled my hair into an elegant twist that showed off my neck, my MIT class ring catching the light when I moved. "The dress," she commanded, and I retrieved my mother's emerald gown from its hiding place in the guest room closet. "Owen said this was too much," I mentioned as I slipped it on. "Owen's an idiot," Margaret replied flatly, zipping me up. "You look like what you are, a force to be reckoned with." I stared at my reflection. The woman looking back wasn't the invisible wife who'd spent 7 years in shadows. She was someone else. Someone who belonged in boardrooms, on stages, at the head of tables. Margaret drove us to the Meridian Grand in her BMW, classical music playing softly through the speakers. "You know what you're doing?" she asked as we pulled into the valet area. "I'm taking back what's mine." "Good." She squeezed my hand, her wedding ring pressing into my palm. "Daniel's inside. He'll make sure people are watching when it happens." The hotel lobby was already buzzing with formally dressed guests heading toward the ballroom. I hung back, timing my approach. At 8:30, I walked toward the entrance where the same security guard from weeks ago stood with his iPad. "Ma'am," he started, recognizing me. "I know. Guests wait outside." I positioned myself where I had a clear view through the glass doors. Inside, Owen stood at the microphone, Natalie glowing beside him in a dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Harrison Blackwood sat at the head table, his phone face down beside his plate. Other board members were scattered throughout the room, champagne glasses raised as Owen began what was clearly his promotion acceptance speech. I pulled out my phone at exactly 8:46 p.m. 1 minute until my scheduled email would send. But I couldn't wait. My fingers moved across the screen, typing 4 words to Harrison Blackwood. "Check your email now." I hit send and watched through the glass as Harrison's phone buzzed. He frowned, picked it up, and his expression shifted from mild annoyance to shock. His eyes widened as he opened attachment after attachment. The CFO beside him noticed his reaction and leaned over. Within seconds, both their phones were out. Owen was mid-sentence, saying something about innovative solutions that pushed Vertex forward, when Harrison stood abruptly. The room fell silent. "Mr. Mercer," Harrison's voice carried even through the glass. "We need to discuss something. Now." Owen's confident smile faltered. Behind him, Natalie's hand moved to his arm, but he shook her off, his face draining of color as more board members checked their phones. The domino effect was beautiful. One phone lighting up, then another, until the entire head table was staring at screens showing 7 years of my work with my name digitally stamped throughout. Daniel, Margaret's husband, stood up from his table in accounting. "Is it true?" he asked loudly. "Has Owen been taking credit for his wife's work?" The ballroom erupted. Voices rose in confusion and outrage. Someone said, "The algorithms have signatures embedded in them." Another voice, "This goes back 7 years." Through it all, I stood in the corridor, visible through the glass doors, wearing my mother's emerald dress that Owen said was too much. Several people inside noticed me, pointing, whispering. Harrison's eyes found mine through the glass, and this time his nod wasn't puzzled. It was understanding. Recognition. Respect. Owen's gaze finally landed on me, and in that moment he knew. His house of cards wasn't just falling. It was being deliberately demolished, card by card, by the woman he'd told to wait outside. The ballroom doors burst open and Owen stumbled out, his polished composure completely shattered. His bow tie hung crooked, his face flushed red, and I watched the champagne flute slip from his fingers, crystal shattering across the marble floor in a constellation of broken pieces. The sound echoed in the sudden silence of the corridor. "Lucy, what did you do?" His voice cracked, high and desperate. Nothing like the confident executive who'd walked through these same doors hours earlier. His eyes darted between my face and my dress as if seeing me for the first time in years. "I stopped being invisible," I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. "By the way, I start at Nexus Dynamics on Monday. Chief Innovation Officer." They were particularly interested in the supply chain algorithm, the one you've been presenting as yours for the past 3 years. His mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. Behind him, guests were flooding into the corridor, their formal wear rustling as they craned to see what was happening. I heard someone whisper, "That's his wife. The one who actually wrote everything." "You can't. This is corporate sabotage," Owen sputtered, reaching for legal terms he didn't understand. I'll sue you for what? Telling the truth. I pulled out my phone, showing him the email I'd sent. Every line of code has my digital signature. Every algorithm traces back to my laptop. Even your MIT thesis presentation. That was my work from grad school, just reformatted. Harrison Blackwood emerged from the ballroom then, his silver hair slightly disheveled, his expression a fascinating mixture of fury and something that looked almost like respect. He walked directly to me, ignoring Owen completely. "Ms. Hawthorne," he said, using my maiden name deliberately. "That consulting work 3 years ago. The portfolio optimization for my personal investments. That was you." It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. Every line of it. I knew something was familiar about the coding style when Owen presented the Caldwell project. The elegance, the efficiency, it was identical. He turned to Owen with a look that could have frozen fire. "You told me you'd been working on it solo for months." "Mr. Blackwood, I can explain," Owen started. "Save it for the lawyers," Harrison cut him off. "Ms. Hawthorne, Vertex Industries owes you a substantial debt. I'd like to discuss bringing you on as Senior Technical Director, with full retroactive credit for all innovations." "That's a generous offer," I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "But I've already accepted a position with Nexus Dynamics. They offered me something Vertex never did, respect from day one." The corridor suddenly filled with new voices, authoritative and urgent. 3 people in dark suits with FBI badges visible on their belts were walking briskly toward us, and I recognized the lead agent. Margaret's husband Daniel had mentioned his college roommate worked in financial crimes. "Natalie Frost?" the lead agent called out. Natalie, who'd been trying to blend into the crowd of guests, froze. Her silver dress suddenly looked like armor that couldn't protect her. "We need to speak with you regarding embezzlement charges at Vertex Industries and 2 previous companies." "This is insane." Natalie's composed facade cracked completely. "I haven't done anything. This is a setup." But the agents were already reading her rights, and Grace Chin was hurrying over with a laptop, showing the agents something on the screen. I caught a glimpse. Bank records showing the transfers Owen had made to accounts in Natalie's name, the same ones I'd documented. "She's done this before," Grace was saying to the agents. "At her last 2 companies. Always targets married executives, helps them hide assets while stealing from the company." Natalie's screams echoed through the marble halls as they led her away. "Owen said it was legal. He said it was consulting fees. This is his fault." Owen's face went from red to white. "She's lying. I don't know what she's talking about." "Really?" I pulled up the recording on my phone, his voice filling the corridor. "The transfers to Natalie need to stay hidden. Route them through the consulting budget." Harrison's expression darkened further. "Mr. Mercer, please follow me. The board will meet immediately." They disappeared into a conference room, but not before Harrison turned back to me. "Ms. Hawthorne, would you be willing to join us? We need to understand the full scope of the innovations you created." I followed them into a wood-paneled conference room where the entire board had assembled. For 3 hours they went through everything. Each algorithm was pulled up on screens, my digital signatures glowing in the code like neon signs. The CFO had brought in their head of IT, who confirmed that the embedded timestamps proved I'd written everything from my personal laptop, not Vertex systems. "This logarithmic optimization alone saved us $12 million over 5 years, the CFO said, looking at me with something approaching awe. "You wrote this?" "In my kitchen," I confirmed. While Owen slept. Owen sat at the far end of the table, shrinking smaller with each revelation. When they pulled up the recording of him admitting to stealing my work, he didn't even try to defend himself anymore. "Mr. Mercer," Harrison finally said, "your employment is terminated effective immediately. You'll forfeit all bonuses, stock options, and severance. We'll also be pursuing legal action to recover the funds transferred to Ms. Frost." "You can't do this," Owen whispered. "I have a family." "You should have thought of that before you stole from your family," Harrison replied coldly. "When they offered me compensation, retroactive pay for 7 years of unacknowledged work, the number they quoted made my breath catch. It was more than Owen had earned in his entire career at Vertex. "That's generous," I said, "but I'll need to have my lawyer review everything." "Of course." Harrison stood, extending his hand. Ms. Hawthorne, I deeply regret that we failed to see what was happening. If you ever reconsider joining Vertex. I won't, I said simply. But thank you for finally seeing the truth. As I left the conference room, Owen tried to grab my arm. Lucy, please. Think about Emma. I pulled away from his touch. I am thinking about Emma. I'm thinking about showing her that no one has the right to steal your work, your credit, or your dignity. Not even her father. The corridor was still full of guests, all watching as I walked past in my mother's emerald dress. Some nodded respectfully. Others whispered to each other. Grace Chen caught my eye and mouthed thank you, and I realized my vindication had freed her too. Margaret drove me home from the hotel in silence, the weight of what had just happened settling over me like a heavy blanket. When we pulled up to my apartment building, the lights were on in our unit. The babysitter's car was gone, which meant Owen had come home and sent her away. My phone showed 12 missed calls from him. I climbed the stairs slowly, my mother's emerald dress rustling with each step. When I opened the door, Owen was sitting on our second-hand couch, still in his tuxedo, his face buried in his hands. Emma's bedroom door was closed. She's asleep, he said without looking up. The babysitter said she was asking for you. I walked past him to Emma's room, cracking the door open. She was curled up with her stuffed rabbit, her dark hair spread across the pillow. I kissed her forehead gently, then closed the door and returned to face Owen. I'm moving to my brother's tonight, he said, his voice hollow. My lawyer will contact you about custody arrangements. Fine. He looked up then, his eyes red-rimmed. How long were you planning this? How long were you stealing from me? I countered. He had no answer for that. The next morning, Emma padded into the kitchen where I was making pancakes, her favorite Saturday breakfast. She climbed onto her usual chair, but her eyes went to Owen's empty seat. Where's Daddy? I set down the spatula and sat beside her, taking her small hands in mine. Daddy's not living here anymore, sweetheart. Why? Her lower lip trembled. Sometimes when people do things that aren't right, they have to face consequences. Daddy took credit for Mommy's work, and that wasn't honest. Like when Jake copied my math homework and got in trouble? The simplicity of her comparison made my chest ache. Yes, like that, but with grown-up work. Are you sad? She asked, studying my face with those serious brown eyes she'd inherited from me. I considered lying, giving her the comfortable answer. But she deserved truth. I'm sad for the daddy he could have been. The one who would have been proud of Mommy's work instead of taking it. But I'm not sad about the choice he made. That's his to live with. He thought about this, then nodded. Can you teach me coding today? Since Daddy's not here to interrupt. My heart cracked and mended all at once. Of course, baby. We'll start right after breakfast. By Monday morning, the story had exploded across financial media. Bloomberg ran a segment titled, The Invisible Wife Who Exposed Corporate Theft. CNN Money called it, The Algorithm Affair. My phone buzzed constantly with interview requests from the Wall Street Journal, TechCrunch, Forbes. I declined them all with the same message. My work will speak for itself. The only statement I gave was to a small women in tech blog that had supported female engineers for years. For 7 years, my contributions were erased. Today, I begin writing my own story at Nexus Dynamics. That's all that matters. Vertex Industries stock dropped 18% in early trading. Screenshots of my embedded code signatures were circulating on Twitter, with programmers marveling at how thoroughly I documented my ownership. Someone leaked the recording of Owen admitting to theft, and it went viral on TikTok with the hashtag #InvisibleWife. Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. The voice was tired, pleading, Owen's older brother, Marcus. Lucy, please. I'm begging you. Owen's lost everything. His accounts are frozen, no firm will hire him, he's staying in my basement. Can't you drop the charges? For the family's sake? For Emma. I let his words hang in the air before responding. Marcus, for 7 years I was erased. My work, my contributions, my very existence in Owen's professional life, all deliberately hidden. He made his choices. But he's my brother. And Emma's my daughter. She needs to see that stealing someone's work has consequences. I won't teach her that forgiveness means accepting erasure. His reputation is destroyed. Isn't that enough? His reputation was built on my work. It was always going to crumble. The only question was when. I hung up without saying goodbye. 7 years of invisibility had earned Owen more than just professional ruin. It had earned my complete indifference to his fate. Monday morning came with Boston sunshine streaming through my bedroom window. I dressed carefully. A navy suit that fit perfectly, my MIT class ring polished, my mother's pearl earrings that she'd worn to her own first day at IBM 40 years ago. Emma watched me getting ready, her eyes bright with pride. "You look like a boss, Mommy." "I am a boss, sweetheart." The Nexus Dynamics building was all glass and steel, modern architecture that spoke of innovation and transparency. Patricia Kelman met me in the lobby herself, her handshake firm and warm. "Lucy, we're so thrilled you're here. Your team is waiting in conference room A." When she opened the door, 20 developers rose to their feet and began applauding. The sound washed over me like warm rain after a 7-year drought. These weren't polite claps. They were genuine, enthusiastic, celebrating. Ms. Hawthorne, the lead developer, a young woman named Priya, stepped forward. "We've all studied your algorithms. The supply chain optimization, the predictive modeling. It's brilliant. We've been waiting for you." "Waiting for me?" I repeated, my voice catching slightly. "Patricia showed us your work months ago when she was trying to recruit you. We've been hoping you'd choose us ever since." Priya grinned. "Nobody else thinks like you do. Your code, it's like poetry that actually works." An older developer named James added, "I've been in this field 30 years and your elegant solutions to complex problems, they're textbook material. Literally. MIT wants to use your algorithms in their coursework." Standing there, surrounded by people who saw my work, who knew my name, who celebrated my contributions, I finally understood what recognition felt like. Not stolen, not borrowed, not hidden behind someone else's name, but earned and acknowledged and celebrated. "Thank you," I managed, my eyes stinging with tears I refused to let fall. "Should we get to work?" Patricia smiled. "Your office is ready when you are. Corner suite, your name already on the door." As the team dispersed to their workstations, chattering excitedly about the projects we'd tackle together, I stood by the window overlooking Boston's skyline. Somewhere out there, Owen was probably in his brother's basement scrolling through job rejection emails. Somewhere, Natalie was meeting with lawyers about her embezzlement charges. Somewhere, Vertex was scrambling to understand the systems I'd built. But here, in this room where my name was known and my work was valued, I was exactly where I belonged. 6 months had transformed everything. I stood backstage at the Boston Tech Innovation Summit, my hands steady as I reviewed my presentation slides one final time. The algorithm I'd created, now properly credited to Lucy Hawthorne, had revolutionized logistics across retail, healthcare, and manufacturing. 3 industries, billions in savings, and this time my name was on every slide. "5 minutes, Ms. Hawthorne," the stage manager said, and I nodded, smoothing my black dress. Not emerald this time, but something I'd chosen for myself. The auditorium was packed, over 2,000 attendees waiting to hear about the innovation that Forbes had called the most significant supply chain breakthrough of the decade. As I walked onto the stage, the lights warming my face, I spotted familiar figures in the audience. Patricia Kelman in the front row, beaming with pride. Margaret and Daniel near the middle, both giving me thumbs up. And there, in a shadowed corner near the back, Harrison Blackwood. "Good morning," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the convention center. "I'm Lucy Hawthorne, Chief Innovation Officer at Nexus Dynamics, and today I want to talk about what happens when invisible work becomes visible." The presentation flowed perfectly. Every demonstration, every data point, every innovation properly attributed. When I showed the year-over-year improvements, someone in the audience actually gasped. During the Q&A, a young woman raised her hand. "Ms. Hawthorne, your story about being excluded from recognition has inspired so many of us. What advice would you give to women whose contributions are being overlooked?" "Document everything," I said without hesitation. "Trust your worth. And never let anyone tell you to wait outside a room you helped build." The applause lasted so long the moderator had to intervene. As I left the stage, an assistant handed me a bouquet of white roses with a card. "We should have invited you inside. Harrison Blackwood." I smiled, thinking of where those flowers would look perfect. Right next to my Nexus Employee of the Year award, the one my team had surprised me with last month. 2 weeks later, Emma's school science fair arrived with all the fanfare of a major production. She'd been working on her project for months. a simple app that helped kids learn coding through storytelling. I'd guided her when she asked, but she'd done the work herself, debugging with the patience I'd tried to teach her. And now, presenting Code Tales by Emma Hawthorne, the principal announced. I watched my daughter walk to the microphone with a confidence I'd never possessed at her age. She explained her project clearly, demonstrating how narrative structures could teach logical thinking. Her presentation was polished but genuine, and when the judges asked technical questions, she answered without hesitation. "Who inspired this project?" one judge asked. Emma's eyes found mine in the crowd. "My mom, Lucy Hawthorne. She's the smartest programmer in the world, and she taught me that code is just another way to tell stories." When they announced her first place win, she ran straight to me, trophy in hand. "I did it, Mommy. And nobody can take credit for it but me." In that moment, I realized I'd broken the cycle. My daughter would never stand outside a door she deserved to walk through. She'd never let anyone claim her work. She'd never disappear into someone else's shadow. The email arrived exactly 1 year after the gala, the night everything changed. I recognized the email address immediately, omercer_ohio@gmail.com. The subject line read simply, "I'm sorry." I stared at it for a long moment, my finger hovering over the delete button. But curiosity won. I opened it. "Lucy, I know you probably won't read this, but I need to say it. I'm working at my brother's Toyota dealership now, in the service department. It's honest work, at least. I see what I lost every time Emma's accomplishments show up on social media through mutual friends. I was a fool. I threw away the best thing in my life for an illusion of success. Natalie got 18 months minimum security. I got what I deserved too, a life without you and Emma. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what I took from you. And I'm sorry. Owen." I read it twice, feeling nothing but a distant kind of pity. This man who'd once made me feel invisible was now truly invisible himself, working in obscurity in Ohio while I was reshaping entire industries. I clicked archive without responding. Some messages, like some people, deserved only silence. My office at Nexus occupied the southeast corner of the 42nd floor, walls of glass offering a panoramic view of Boston. But it was the western view that I treasured most. Every morning with my first cup of coffee, I could see the Meridian Grand Hotel 5 blocks away. The same building where I'd stood outside, barred from entry, watching my life's work credited to someone else. Sometimes I thought about that woman in the emerald dress, standing in the corridor with her phone in her hand, making the choice that changed everything. He felt like a different person now, someone I knew intimately but no longer was. That woman had been invisible, erased, waiting for permission to exist. The woman I'd become wrote her own permissions. A knock on my door interrupted my morning ritual. Priya entered with her tablet, excitement bright in her eyes. "Lucy, the Pentagon just approved our contract. They want to implement your algorithm across their entire supply chain. Set up the team meeting for this afternoon," I said, already thinking through the implementation challenges. As she left, I turned back to the window to my view of the Meridian Grand. Next month, Nexus would hold our own gala there. Patricia had asked me to help plan it, and I'd insisted on one detail. Every employee could bring anyone they wanted. No one would wait outside. I pulled out the invitation list I'd been reviewing. My name was at the top, followed by +1, Emma, who'd already picked out her dress. At the bottom of the list, I'd added one more name, Grace Chin, Owen's former secretary, who now worked in our HR department. She'd sent me a thank you note after I'd recommended her for the position. "You gave me the courage to stop being invisible too." The morning sun caught my MIT ring, sending small rainbows across my desk. In 6 months, I'd gone from standing outside to standing on stages. From being erased to being essential. From invisible to undeniable. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Mom, can we work on my new app idea tonight? It's about women in tech who changed the world." "Of course," I typed back. "We'll start with Ada Lovelace and work our way forward." "And we'll end with you," she replied, followed by a heart emoji. I smiled, thinking about the woman I'd been a year ago standing outside that ballroom. She'd thought she was alone, defeated, erased. She had no idea she was actually standing at the beginning of everything. The woman who was told to wait outside had become the one everyone was waiting to see. And this time I held the guest list. If this story of sweet revenge had you cheering for Lucy, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Lucy stood outside that ballroom in her emerald dress, sending the email that changed everything. What was your favorite moment of justice? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. My husband told me, "Don't embarrass me. You're too plain for my wealthy colleagues. Stay in your lane." I agreed quietly. I smiled and said, "Sure." A week later he nearly choked when I walked into his private club as the owner. His so-called friends bowed to the woman he once dismissed. "Don't embarrass me tonight. You're too plain for my wealthy colleagues. Stay in your lane." Clark delivered these words while adjusting his Hermes tie in our bedroom mirror, speaking as casually as if he were commenting on the weather. I stood behind him, holding the cocktail dress I'd been about to put on for the Meridian Club dinner, watching his reflection for any sign that he recognized the cruelty of what he'd just said. There was none. He simply continued knotting his tie, oblivious to the fact that his plain wife had personally approved every one of his colleagues' memberships to the very club where tonight's dinner would occur, that the building they worshipped as a temple of success bore my name on the deed. Before we continue, I want to thank you for being here. If you believe that no one should be dismissed as too plain for success, please consider subscribing. It helps more women hear these powerful stories. I hung the dress back in the closet, my movements deliberate and calm. "Of course," I said. "I understand." He smiled then, that satisfied expression he wore when a negotiation went his way. "Good. These Korean clients expect a certain standard. Morrison's wife spent 2 hours at the salon today just for this dinner. Blackstone's wife flew to New York last week for a new outfit." He turned from the mirror to face me directly. "You have to understand, Audrey, that at this level appearance matters. First impressions are everything." 4 years of marriage and he still believed I didn't grasp basic social concepts. I wanted to tell him that I'd watched those same wives stumble through small talk at a dozen events, their salon hair and designer clothes unable to mask their desperate need for approval. Instead, I straightened his already perfect tie, playing the role he'd cast me in since our wedding day. "What time will you be home?" I asked. "Late. These dinners run long, especially when we're closing deals." He checked his Rolex, the one he'd bought to impress Morrison, not knowing that Morrison's own watch was a fake that I'd chosen to ignore when reviewing his membership application. "There's leftover pasta in the fridge if you get hungry." The leftover pasta from 3 nights ago, when he'd ordered Italian from the place that charged $40 for basic marinara because they delivered to Meridian Club members. He'd eaten barely half his portion, complaining the sauce was too acidic, while I finished my sandwich from the deli down the street. After he left, trailing cologne that cost more than our monthly utilities, I sat at our small dining table and opened my laptop. Not to check our bank balance or browse social media, but to review the quarterly reports for V. Monroe Holdings. The portfolio my grandmother had built from nothing, the empire she'd constructed while men like Clark dismissed her as furniture in their boardrooms. My phone buzzed with a message from Marcus Blackwood, the general manager at Meridian. "Mrs. Hartwell, tonight's dinner is proceeding as planned. Your husband's table is set for 12. Shall I maintain standard protocol?" Standard protocol meant treating me like a ghost when Clark was present, pretending the owner of the establishment didn't exist. I'd maintained this charade for 3 years, watching Clark preen in my building while telling people his wife worked in administration, with a dismissive wave that suggested I filed papers for a living. "Yes," I typed back. "For now." The apartment felt smaller after Clark left, or maybe it just felt more honest. Without his presence demanding space, requiring accommodation, needing constant validation that he was climbing the right ladder fast enough, I could breathe. I walked to our bedroom closet and pushed aside the row of Clark's suits, Armani, Hugo Boss, Tom Ford, to reach the back wall where I kept a single garment bag he'd never noticed. Inside hung a Saint Laurent dress my grandmother had bought in 1982, the year she made her first million. She'd worn it exactly once, to a shareholder meeting where she'd gained controlling interest in her first commercial property. "Save it," she told me during those final weeks in the hospital. "Wear it the day you stop hiding." I ran my fingers across the fabric, still perfect after all these years. Clark would call it plain, black, simple lines, no embellishments. He wouldn't understand that its power lay in its simplicity, that the woman wearing it didn't need decoration to command a room. My phone rang. Janet, my cousin, whose name appeared above a photo from Better Times, before her husband had turned their marriage into a transaction and she turned her pain into Xanax and wine. I need to see you, she said without preamble. Robert's at it again. I found receipts. Come over, I said. Clark's at a dinner. At Meridian? Where else? She laughed, but it was bitter. Must be nice being married to someone important enough for Meridian. I bit back the irony of her statement. Janet arrived 20 minutes later, her designer handbag worth more than our rent but her face showing the exhaustion that money couldn't fix. She collapsed onto our second-hand couch, the one Clark complained about whenever we had company, and started crying before she'd even taken off her coat. 23 years old, she said between sobs. His personal trainer. Can you believe it? I'm 42, Audrey. When did I become the disposable wife? I sat beside her, offering tissues and silence. There were no good words for this moment, no comfort that wouldn't sound hollow. Janet had married Robert for love, or what she'd thought was love, and discovered too late that he'd married her for her trust fund and connections. Clark doesn't even hide it anymore, Janet continued. Robert, I mean. He takes her to Meridian for lunch. Books the private dining room. The staff all know they give me these pitying looks when I'm there. The staff at my club, witnessing the destruction of my cousin's marriage in my private dining room. I made a mental note to review Robert's membership status. There were standards to maintain, even if Clark didn't think I understood such concepts. What are you going to do? I asked. Leave him. Take what I can get in the divorce and start over. She looked around our apartment, taking in the shabby furniture, the cramped space, the absence of luxury. You're lucky, you know. Clark might not be rich, but at least he comes home to you. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of her statement. Clark came home to the idea of me, the convenient wife who kept his life organized while staying out of his real world. But Janet didn't need my problems tonight. She needed my couch, my silence, and my promise not to judge her for what came next. After she left, I stood at our bedroom window watching the city lights sparkle below. Somewhere out there, Clark was sitting in my club at my table, surrounded by people who owed their membership to my approval, telling them his wife was too plain for their company. The thought should have hurt, but instead, it crystallized something that had been forming since I'd found my grandmother's will. Being underestimated was a weapon, but only if you knew when to reveal your true power. Tonight wasn't that night. But soon, very soon, Clark would learn that the plain wife he'd dismissed owned the very kingdom he was so desperate to conquer. Monday morning arrived with Clark already gone to the office, leaving only the lingering scent of his cologne and a note reminding me to pick up his suits from the dry cleaner. Mrs. Kim's shop sat 3 blocks from our apartment, wedged between a Vietnamese restaurant and a failing bookstore, the kind of neighborhood Clark called transitional when explaining why we lived there. Mrs. Kim looked up from her pressing machine as I entered, her face brightening with the particular smile she reserved for regular customers who actually talked to her. Mrs. Hartwell. I have Mr. Hartwell's suits ready. Such beautiful fabric. He must be very successful. He likes to look professional, I said, pulling out my wallet. She disappeared into the back, returning with 5 suits wrapped in plastic. As she rang them up, she tilted her head thoughtfully. I saw him last Tuesday at that fancy Meridian club. My nephew works valet there. Very exclusive place. Tuesday. Clark had called that morning about a client emergency, said he'd be in depositions all day. Kept my voice steady. Oh. He has lots of meetings there. Yes, with that elegant blonde woman. Such a lovely laugh. My nephew says you can hear it across the whole dining room. Very charming. Is she his sister? They seem very close. My fingers tightened on my credit card, but I managed a neutral expression. Must be someone from the firm. They often have team lunches. Mrs. Kim nodded, but something in her eyes suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. Every Tuesday, my nephew says. Same table by the window. Same woman. She must be very important client. I signed the receipt, my signature slightly shakier than usual. Clark works with many important people. Outside, I stood on the sidewalk holding $5,000 worth of suits while processing what Mrs. Kim had inadvertently revealed. Every Tuesday. The same woman. An elegant blonde with a memorable laugh. Clark had worked late every Tuesday for the past 2 months, always with excuses about difficult clients or urgent briefs. Back at the apartment, I hung his suits in our bedroom closet, each one in its designated spot because Clark insisted on organization. My phone buzzed with a text from Janet. Can I come by? Robert's at another conference, and I can't stand being alone. She arrived 30 minutes later with coffee and pastries from the expensive bakery Clark always said we couldn't afford. We sat at my small dining table and I watched her pick apart a croissant without eating any of it. I need to use your bathroom, she said suddenly, getting up before I could respond. But instead of heading to the bathroom, I heard her footsteps in the hallway. Audrey, she called, where do you keep extra blankets? I'm freezing. Hall closet top shelf, I replied, not thinking about what else was stored there. The sound that followed wasn't quite a scream, more like a sharp intake of breath that seemed to go on forever. I found Janet sitting on the hallway floor, surrounded by papers she'd accidentally knocked down while reaching for blankets. Financial statements spread around her like fallen leaves. Property deeds. Investment portfolios. And there, right in front of her, the Meridian Club ownership documents with my name printed clearly across the top. Audrey. Her voice came out strangled. What is this? I knelt beside her, gathering papers with steady hands. Something Clark doesn't know about. Doesn't know about? You own Meridian? The Meridian Club where Robert and Clark practically live. My grandmother left it to me. Among other things. Janet's eyes scanned the documents, her expression shifting from shock to something harder. $80 million. You have $80 million and Clark doesn't know. He never asked. He assumed I was what I appeared to be. But why? Why hide this? I sat back against the wall holding the papers against my chest. Grandma spent 40 years being invisible in boardrooms while men stole her ideas. She wanted to know if Clark loved me or the idea of what I could give him. And Tuesday lunches with an elegant blonde woman. Every week. Same table by the window. Janet's face darkened. That piece of... She stopped herself, then looked at me with new understanding. You're planning something. I'm waiting, I corrected. There's a difference. She helped me return everything to its hiding place, then sat back at the dining table with a different energy. You know what? We're both idiots. Hiding who we are, accepting whatever crumbs they throw us. Before I could respond, my phone rang. Clark's name appeared on the screen. Great news, he said without greeting. Morrison just called. I made senior partner. Youngest in the firm's history. Congratulations, I began, but he was already continuing. There's a celebration dinner tomorrow night at Meridian. Black tie, very exclusive. Morrison says it's partners only though. Wives will have their own event next month. Some kind of tea or something more appropriate to your interests. More appropriate to my interests. As if he had any idea what my interests were. I understand, I said. You're not upset? I know you were looking forward to the partners' dinner. I had never once expressed interest in his firm's dinners. He was projecting what he thought I should want, then dismissing it preemptively. No, Clark. Enjoy your celebration. You're the best, Audrey. So understanding. Morrison's wife throws fits about these things, but you get it. You know your place. After he hung up, Janet stared at me. You know your place? He actually said that. He says a lot of things. That night, Clark practiced his acceptance speech in our bathroom mirror while I lay on our bed, listening through the thin door. He thanked Morrison for the mentorship, Blackstone for the partnership, the mysterious Tuesday woman he referred to as Charlotte from consulting for her invaluable support. Not one mention of the wife who'd worked 2 jobs to put him through law school, who'd typed his briefs when he broke his wrist, who'd attended every meaningless firm picnic and pretended his colleagues' stories were interesting. While he delivered his speech to his reflection, I retrieved my car keys and drove to the storage unit across town. Clark thought I couldn't afford a car, didn't know about the BMW registered to V. Monroe Holdings that I kept for moments when I needed to be myself. The storage unit held everything Clark had never bothered to ask about. My grandmother's furniture, too valuable for our apartment but too meaningful to sell. Boxes of photographs from her years of building an empire in silence. And there, in a trunk that hadn't been opened since her funeral, her leather journal. I sat on the concrete floor and read by the fluorescent lights. Her handwriting, strong at first then gradually weakening, documented every slight, every stolen idea, every moment when men had taken credit for her brilliance. But alongside the indignities were the triumphs, carefully recorded in financial terms. The first profitable quarter. The first million. The first property. The acquisition of Meridian, bought from a man who'd laughed at her investment proposals 20 years earlier. The final entry, written a week before she died, made me close the journal and hold it against my chest. Audrey will understand the value of being underestimated. Let them think you're nobody until the moment you show them you're everything. I drove back from the storage unit with my grandmother's journal on the passenger seat, her words echoing in my mind as I navigated the empty streets at midnight. Clark was asleep when I returned, sprawled across our bed in his Harvard Law t-shirt, taking up 3/4 of the mattress as if even in sleep he needed to claim more than his share. The next morning arrived like any other, except this time I knew it would be different. I stood in the kitchen organizing the pantry, placing Clark's overpriced organic pasta in perfect rows because he insisted that visual organization promoted mental clarity. Behind me, I heard him enter the kitchen, his footsteps carrying that particular weight of someone about to deliver what they considered wisdom. He stopped at the microwave, using its black surface as a mirror to adjust his Hermes tie. The silence stretched between us as I continued arranging his gluten-free crackers, waiting for whatever complaint he'd prepared for today. "Don't embarrass me tonight," he said suddenly, his tone conversational as if discussing the weather. "You're too plain for my wealthy colleagues. Stay in your lane." The can of San Marzano tomatoes in my hand weighed exactly 14 ounces according to its label. I focused on that weight, on the way the metal felt against my palm, on anything except the urge to turn around and demonstrate exactly how much damage 14 ounces of canned tomatoes could inflict on a perfectly styled head of hair. From the living room, I heard Janet's coffee cup hit the saucer with a sharp clink. She'd heard everything through our paper-thin walls, the ones Clark constantly complained about but refused to leave because the address was respectable enough for his business cards. "Of course," I said, my voice steady as I placed the can on its designated shelf. "I understand." Clark made a satisfied sound, the kind he produced when a negotiation went his way. He grabbed his travel mug of precisely heated coffee and headed for the door, not bothering with a goodbye kiss or even a backward glance. The apartment door closed with its usual protest from the loose hinges he kept promising to fix. Janet appeared in the kitchen doorway before Clark's footsteps had faded from the hallway. Her face carried the kind of rage that made her look younger, more like the cousin who'd defended me from schoolyard bullies than the woman whose husband was destroying her with his affairs. "I'm going after him," she announced, already moving toward the door. That pathetic excuse for a man needs to hear exactly what. I raised my hand and she stopped mid-step. No. Audrey, he just told you that you're too plain for his precious colleagues. I know what he said. I turned from the pantry to face her fully. "This is my battle, Janet. And it needs to be planned, not reactive." She stood there vibrating with fury on my behalf, and something in my expression must have communicated what I couldn't say aloud yet. Slowly, she walked to our second-hand couch, the one Clark deemed embarrassing whenever anyone visited, and collapsed into its worn cushions. "For years," she said, her voice quieter now but no less intense. 4 years of this and you just take it?" I sat beside her, feeling the familiar sag of cushions that had supported too many difficult conversations. "Tell me what you see, Janet." "All of it." She laughed, but it held no humor. "Where do I start? The birthday he forgot because Morrison needed a fourth for golf? The anniversary dinner he canceled 20 minutes before the reservation because Blackstone wanted to discuss strategy over drinks?" Her hands moved as she spoke, painting Clark's failures in the air between us. "The way he introduces you at events, when he actually brings you, 'This is Audrey, she does administrative work,' with that little wave like he's brushing away a fly." Each word landed with precision, confirming what I'd recorded in my mental ledger for years. "He doesn't even see you," Janet continued. "You're just functionality to him. Someone who keeps his life organized while he pursues what he thinks matters." "And what would hurt him most?" I asked. Janet's eyes sharpened. "Public humiliation. Complete, undeniable, witnessed by everyone humiliation. Clark's entire identity is built on what others think of him. Take that away." She trailed off, understanding dawning on her face. "You're going to destroy him at Meridian." I pulled out my phone and found the contact I'd saved under MB Emergency. Marcus Blackwood's private number, given to me by my grandmother with explicit instructions to use it when the time came. My finger hovered over the call button for a moment, then pressed down. The phone rang twice before a cultured British accent answered. Mrs. Hartwell. I wondered when you might call. Hello, Marcus. It's about time, if I may say so. 20 years I worked for your grandmother, and 3 years I've watched you tolerate that insufferable man in your establishment. You knew. My dear woman, I've known since your first visit. Your grandmother showed me your photograph every week during her final year. This is Audrey, she'd say. She'll understand when she's ready. My throat tightened at the image of my grandmother, dying but still planning my future. I'm ready now. Excellent. The partners' dinner is Thursday, I believe. Your husband has requested the Churchill room. He has good taste in rooms he can't afford. Marcus chuckled. Indeed. Shall we discuss arrangements? I assume you'll want Philippe present. The photographer? The very same. He's captured every significant Meridian moment for the past decade. Very discreet, but his images have a way of circulating among the membership. We spent 20 minutes crafting the details. The seating arrangement that would place Clark at what he thought was the head of the table but would actually become a stage for his humiliation. The timing that would ensure maximum visibility. The specific moment when Marcus would make his announcement, after appetizers but before the main course, when alcohol had loosened inhibitions but hadn't yet clouded judgment. After ending the call, I looked at Janet, who'd been listening with undisguised glee. I need clothes. You need armor, she corrected, grabbing her keys. And I know exactly where to get it. The drive to Nordstrom felt like crossing between two worlds. Janet pulled into the valet area, ignoring my protest about the expense, and led me through doors I'd only walked past before. The private shopping suite occupied the top floor, accessible only by special elevator, a space Clark didn't know existed because he'd never thought to look beyond the regular departments. I pulled out the black American Express card linked to V. Monroe Holdings, the one Clark had never seen because he'd never asked about my wallet's contents. The saleswoman's eyes widened slightly at the card's weight and design. Metal, not plastic, with no preset spending limit. How may I assist you today? She asked, her entire demeanor shifting to accommodate serious money. I need something that says power, Janet announced before I could speak. Something that makes every man in a room stand up when she walks in. What followed was a transformation that cost more than Clark claimed we had in our savings. A black Saint Laurent dress that seemed simple until you noticed the perfect cut, the way it suggested rather than revealed. Louboutin heels that added 3 inches and changed my entire posture. Diamond earrings that had belonged to my grandmother, retrieved from the safety deposit box Clark didn't know existed. Standing before the 3-way mirror, I saw someone else entirely. Not plain Audrey who organized pantries and accepted insults. This was someone who owned buildings, who controlled destinies, who could destroy a man with a single word. This was who my grandmother had always known I could become. Janet dropped me at our apartment building after our shopping expedition, the Nordstrom bags hidden in her trunk until I could retrieve them later without Clark noticing. The doorman, Mr. Peterson, gave me his usual nod, unaware that I'd already drafted the paperwork to double his salary once I took ownership of the building next month. Tuesday arrived with Clark leaving early for what he called strategic planning sessions, but I now knew were extended breakfasts with Charlotte Blackstone. I waited until his Uber turned the corner before walking 6 blocks to the office building Clark had never noticed, the one with V. Monroe Holdings listed discreetly on the directory between a dental practice and an accounting firm. My real office occupied half of the 14th floor, a space my grandmother had designed with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city she'd conquered in silence. Clark believed I spent my Tuesdays at the community college taking spreadsheet courses, a fiction he'd created and I'd never corrected. The irony of him explaining Excel functions to me while I managed multimillion-dollar property portfolios never stopped being darkly amusing. I settled at my desk and pulled up Meridian's membership database on my computer, the master files that contained far more than just names and addresses. Every incident report, every complaint, every whispered scandal that Marcus had documented over 20 years appeared in these digital files, my grandmother's insistence on thorough record-keeping now serving as ammunition. Morrison's file came first. Inherited membership from his father in 1998, The transfer process despite 3 separate violations for what the reports delicately termed inappropriate conduct with female staff. 2 settlements paid quietly, 1 server who'd transferred to our Phoenix property after Morrison cornered her in the wine cellar. Clark idolized this man, called him a titan of industry. I made notes about Thursday's seating arrangement, ensuring Morrison would have the perfect view of his protégé's downfall. Blackstone's record proved even more interesting. His wife Charlotte, the elegant blonde who lunched with my husband every Tuesday, had spent 2 years campaigning for membership. The file contained 17 letters, each more desperate than the last, offering increasingly large donations and promising referrals of other wealthy applicants. She'd finally received approval only after her father-in-law, a federal judge, threatened to investigate our liquor license. The weakness in her desperation would serve me well on Thursday. Reeves had attempted to buy his way in with a $50,000 donation before anyone explained that Meridian didn't accept bribes, only qualifications. His file included a note from Marcus, money but no class. Approved only due to father-in-law's pharmaceutical holdings. Watch for inappropriate behavior. Thursday would be his last dinner at my club. My phone buzzed with a text from Janet. You need to see this. Coming to your office. She arrived 20 minutes later, her face flushed with the excitement of discovery. Without speaking, she handed me her phone, Charlotte Blackstone's Instagram account already open on the screen. The evidence spread before me like a roadmap of betrayal. 12 photos over 6 months, all geotagged at Meridian, all featuring Clark despite Charlotte's careful attempts to keep him partially out of frame. But I recognized my husband's watch, his hands, the way he held his wine glass with 3 fingers instead of 2. Power lunch with brilliant minds, read the caption from 3 weeks ago. Clark's sleeve visible at the edge of the frame. Discussing futures with someone special, from last month. His reflection caught in her sunglasses. Some conversations change everything, posted yesterday. His monogrammed cufflinks that I'd given him for our anniversary clearly visible as he reached across the table. Janet screenshot each photo methodically while I sat back in my grandmother's leather chair, understanding finally washing over me. This wasn't about my appearance. Clark hadn't rejected me for being plain. He'd already chosen my replacement, someone whose husband traveled internationally 3 weeks of every month, someone whose desperation for status matched his own. She's been hunting him, Janet said quietly. Look at the progression. The photos get bolder. The captions more intimate. She's marking territory. Let her mark all she wants. After Thursday, neither of them will be welcome in any establishment I own. Wednesday passed in careful preparation. I confirmed details with Marcus, arranged for Philippe to have unrestricted access for photography, and reviewed the presentation Clark had left on our dining table. His proposal for the Korean executives was good but not great, lacking the property holdings and international connections that would seal the deal. Information I possessed but he'd never thought to ask about. Thursday morning dawned gray and humid, the kind of weather that made Clark irritable about his hair. I woke at my usual time, prepared his breakfast with mechanical precision, and listened to him complain about the humidity's effect on his appearance while eating the eggs I'd made exactly how he liked them. He spent 2 hours preparing for the dinner, trying on 3 different ties before settling on the Hermes I'd seen him wear to every important meeting for the past year. I sat on our bed with a paperback romance novel, the kind with a shirtless man on the cover that Clark found embarrassing, and watched him practice his presentation in the mirror. The key, he said to his reflection, is making them feel exclusive. Like they're joining something rarefied. I turned a page loudly. He glanced at my book with undisguised disdain. You should try reading something substantial, he said. The Financial Times, perhaps. Though I suppose it might be difficult for you to follow. You're probably right, I agreed, returning to my book about a secretary who inherits a fortune and destroys everyone who'd dismissed her. Clark didn't appreciate irony. He left at 7:30, spending 5 minutes adjusting his appearance in the hallway mirror while explaining that these dinners ran late and I shouldn't wait up. The conversation would be about international markets and complex negotiations, things that would bore me. He suggested I order Thai food from the place I liked, maybe watch one of those reality shows that required no intellectual investment. The door closed behind him without a goodbye kiss, a tradition he'd abandoned so long ago I'd forgotten what his lips felt like. 20 minutes later, I stood in our bathroom beginning the ritual my grandmother had taught me during those final months when she could barely stand but still insisted on attending board meetings. This wasn't about beauty. Clark was right that I was plain. This was about presence, about transforming into someone who commanded attention through power rather than prettiness. The Saint Laurent dress slipped on like liquid shadow, transforming my body into something architectural. The Louboutins changed my posture, forcing my spine straight and my shoulders back. The diamond earrings caught the light like captured stars, the same earrings my grandmother had worn to every meeting where men tried to buy her out, push her out or force her out. Janet arrived to help with my hair, sweeping it into the same chignon my grandmother had worn for 40 years of battles in boardrooms. She handed me the leather portfolio containing the ownership documents, the proof of what Clark had never bothered to discover. The car waited outside, James behind the wheel of the Bentley that Clark didn't know existed. When he saw me walking toward the car, his eyes filled with tears. "Mrs. Audrey," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You look just like her when she was about to destroy someone." James pulled the Bentley onto Meridian's private drive with the smooth precision of someone who had performed this maneuver countless times, though never with me in the back seat. Through the tinted windows, I watched the building's facade come into view. Limestone and glass rising into the night sky, lit from below with subtle gold lighting that made the entire structure appear to glow from within. This was my building, though I'd only ever entered through the service entrance on the few occasions when I'd needed to sign documents Marcus couldn't bring to my office. 8:45 exactly, Mrs. Hartwell, James announced, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. "Shall I pull to the main entrance?" "Yes." "Let them see the car." The Bentley glided to a stop beneath the portico where Thomas, the head valet who'd been working these doors for 15 years, stood ready. The moment he saw the license plate, VMH001, my grandmother's personal designation, his entire posture changed. His usual efficient movements became almost reverential as he reached for my door handle. "Miss Monroe," he breathed, then caught himself. "Mrs. Hartwell. Welcome to Meridian." The name correction hung in the air between us, heavy with significance. Every staff member knew the Monroe name, knew the stories of my grandmother's monthly inspections, her exacting standards, her ability to recognize every employee by name despite running an empire. They'd been waiting 3 years to see if I would ever claim my inheritance publicly. I stepped out of the Bentley, the click of my heels on the portico's marble announcing my arrival like a drum roll. Through the glass doors, I could see the lobby staff trying to maintain their professional composure while simultaneously attempting to get a better view of the woman they'd only known through signatures on paychecks and glimpses of legal documents. Robert Chin, the head concierge who'd started as a bellhop under my grandmother's management, approached with measured steps that couldn't quite hide his urgency. His usual pristine composure showed cracks, a slight tremor in his hands, eyes bright with something between excitement and vindication. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, his voice carrying 40 years of hospitality experience. "Everything has been arranged according to your specifications. The Churchill room is prepared, the staff has been briefed, and Mr. Blackwood is awaiting your arrival in the observatory lounge." "And my husband?" Robert's expression shifted minutely, professional discretion warring with personal opinion. "Mr. Hartwell arrived 30 minutes ago with the partners from his firm. He's currently entertaining the Korean delegation." The pause before entertaining told me everything. I could picture Clark holding court, 3 drinks deep into his performance, playing the role of power broker in my establishment while the actual power stood in the lobby in designer heels. "Charlotte Blackstone?" I asked. Seated to Mr. Hartwell's immediate right. Her proximity has been noted by several of the other partners' wives. Of course it had. Charlotte's desperate social climbing was as subtle as a neon sign, and the wives of Meridian had spent decades perfecting the art of cataloging inappropriate behavior for future ammunition. I walked through the lobby, my heels creating a rhythm against the marble that seemed to draw every eye in the space. The night manager, Sarah, actually curtsied, an involuntary dip that she immediately tried to convert into reaching for something on her desk. 2 servers carrying champagne trays stopped mid-stride to watch me pass. The entire atmosphere shifted as if the building itself recognized its true owner had finally arrived. The observatory lounge occupied a mezzanine level that overlooked the main dining rooms through specially treated glass. You could see out, but no one could see in. Marcus Blackwood stood near the windows, his silver hair catching the soft lighting as he observed the Churchill room below. "Punctual as always," he said without turning. "Your grandmother would be pleased." I joined him at the window, looking down at the scene unfolding in my private dining room. The Churchill room was Meridian's crown jewel, circular with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city, a baccarat chandelier that cost more than most people's annual salaries, and a table that could seat 20 but tonight held only 12. Clark sat at what he believed was the head of the table, his back to the door in a position that would have made my grandmother laugh. "Never sit with your back to the entrance," she taught me. "That's how you miss seeing your enemies arrive." He was gesturing expansively with his champagne flute, his face flushed with alcohol and self-importance. The Korean executives, Mr. Kim, Mr. Park, and Ms. Lee, according to my files, maintained expressions of polite interest that didn't quite mask their boredom. They'd heard this pitch before, or versions of it, from dozens of American firms trying to break into Asian markets without understanding the culture. Morrison sat to Clark's left, his face already red from wine, occasionally interjecting comments that Clark would then expand upon as if they were his own ideas. Blackstone hunched over his phone, typing with the focused intensity of someone managing a crisis, probably related to his wife's increasingly obvious attraction to my husband. Charlotte Blackstone had positioned herself as close to Clark as social propriety allowed, her chair angled toward him, her body language screaming availability to anyone with eyes. Every few seconds she touched his arm, his shoulder, the back of his chair, each contact lasting a beat too long to be casual. Her wedding ring, an ostentatious display of diamonds that her husband had bought to compensate for his absences, caught the light with every gesture. Reeves sat at the far end, excluded from the main conversation but laughing too loudly at every joke, desperate to be included in a circle that would never fully accept him. His wife, a nervous woman who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, clutched her purse in her lap and said nothing. "Your husband is on his 4th glass of champagne," Marcus observed clinically. "His presentation skills tend to deteriorate after 3. Let him drink." Loose tongues reveal true thoughts. Marcus pulled out his iPad, swiping through screens with practiced efficiency. The photographer is positioned in the southeast corner. He has clear angles of the entire table. The staff has been instructed to serve the appetizer course at 9, main course at 9:45. Your entrance has been scheduled for 9:15, after appetizers but before the conversation turns fully to business. He showed me another screen. Membership records for everyone at the table, their violations, their payments, their secrets, all cataloged in my grandmother's meticulous system. "Reeves has 2 violations this month alone," Marcus noted, both involving inappropriate comments to female staff. "His membership is already under review. After tonight it won't matter." Below us, Clark stood, raising his champagne glass for what appeared to be a toast. Even through the soundproof glass I could see his mouth forming words, his free hand gesturing to encompass the room, the moment, his imagined triumph. "He's toasting to the future," Marcus translated, reading lips with the skill of someone who'd spent decades in hospitality. "To partnerships that transcend borders. To success that lesser men can only dream of." Lesser men. The phrase burned in my chest, fuel for what was about to come. "Ms. Lee speaks fluent English," Marcus continued, though she's been politely pretending otherwise to avoid Clark's attempts at conversation. "Mr. Kim and Mr. Park have already decided to pass on the proposal. Their translator informed me they're only staying out of courtesy." Clark sat down to applause from his colleagues, basking in their approval while Charlotte whispered something in his ear that made him smile. The kind of smile I hadn't seen directed at me in 2 years. Marcus closed his iPad and turned to face me fully. "Your grandmother once told me that revenge is best served not cold, but at exactly the right temperature. Too soon and it lacks impact. Too late and it loses meaning. And tonight is perfectly calibrated." At exactly 9:10 Clark stood again, champagne glass raised for another toast. Through the glass I watched him perform for his audience, unaware that his real audience stood 1 floor above, watching him the way a cat watches a mouse that doesn't yet know it's trapped. Marcus checked his watch. 5 minutes, Mrs. Hartwell. I nodded once and he turned toward the dining room doors to begin the final act of Clark's public life as he knew it. Marcus moved away from my side with the measured steps of someone approaching a lit fuse, knowing the explosion was inevitable but maintaining professional composure nonetheless. I watched from my position just outside the dining room doors as he navigated between the seated guests with practiced precision, approaching Morrison's chair with the gravity of a court bailiff delivering a verdict. The whisper he delivered into Morrison's ear was brief, perhaps 5 seconds, but Morrison's reaction was immediate and dramatic. His face drained of color so quickly I thought he might faint, then he shot to his feet with such force that his chair tipped backward, crashing against the credenza with a sound that made everyone jump. His wine glass, forgotten in his hand, tilted dangerously before he set it down with shaking fingers. Blackstone, seeing his managing partner's reaction, stood without knowing why, a lifetime of hierarchical conditioning making him mirror his superior's actions. Then Reeves, desperate never to be excluded, scrambled to his feet so quickly he knocked his knee against the table, rattling the crystal. The other partners followed in a wave, each standing because the man next to him had stood, none understanding yet what had prompted this sudden display of respect. Only Clark remained seated, his face wearing the confused half-smile of someone who'd missed the punchline of a joke. He looked from Morrison to Blackstone to the standing executives, his mouth opening to ask what was happening, when Morrison reached down and physically grabbed his arm, hauling him to his feet with surprising strength for a man who spent his days behind a desk. "What's going on?" Clark's voice carried that irritated edge he used when things weren't proceeding according to his script. Marcus's voice filled the Churchill room with the kind of clarity that comes from decades of commanding attention in spaces designed for power. "Gentlemen, Mrs. Audrey Hartwell, owner and chairman of V. Monroe Holdings, proprietor of Meridian." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. Even the servers, trained to be invisible, froze mid-motion. The only sound was Charlotte Blackstone's sharp intake of breath, a gasp that seemed to go on forever. I pushed open the doors and entered my domain. Each click of my heels against the Italian marble counted down the seconds of Clark's old life. I didn't hurry. This moment, this walk, this revelation had been building for 4 years, and I would savor every second of it. The Saint Laurent dress moved with me like liquid shadow, the diamonds at my ears catching the light from the baccarat chandelier above, throwing tiny rainbows across the walls. Clark's face began its transformation in real time, a masterclass in psychological collapse that I watched with the detached fascination of a scientist observing an experiment. First came confusion, his eyebrows drawing together as he tried to process why everyone was standing for his plain wife, the one he'd told to stay in her lane just days ago. Then recognition, his eyes widening as they took in the dress, the shoes, the jewelry, all of it worth more than he'd claimed we had in our savings. Finally, the horror, that dawning, crushing realization as his brain finally connected Marcus's words with the woman walking toward him. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound emerged. He looked like a fish pulled from water, gasping for something that was no longer available to him. His hand reached for his champagne glass, missed, knocked it over. The golden liquid spread across the white tablecloth like a prophecy. Charlotte Blackstone's reaction was almost as satisfying. Her perfectly manicured hand flew to her throat in a gesture that would have seemed theatrical if it weren't so genuine. The color drained from her face, leaving her expensive makeup looking like a mask against pale skin. She took a half-step backward, then another, trying to put distance between herself and the catastrophe she'd helped create. Marcus pulled out the chair at the head of the table, the one Clark had been occupying with such authority moments before. I sat down with the deliberate grace my grandmother had drilled into me during those long afternoons in her study, when she'd made me practice sitting and standing until my muscles ached. The chair received me like a throne accepting its rightful occupant. Clark stood frozen until Morrison, operating on some primitive understanding of hierarchy, pushed him toward a side chair, the one usually reserved for junior associates or plus ones who didn't merit proper placement. My husband, the senior partner who'd spent the evening boasting about his connections and influence, sat down heavily in his designated spot at the periphery of power. Morrison's mouth moved, trying to form words, apologies, explanations, anything to fill the terrible silence. "Mrs. Hartwell, we had no idea. Clark never mentioned we would have." I raised my hand, a simple gesture that stopped him mid-stammered sentence. The power in that moment, the ability to silence a room full of men who considered themselves masters of the universe, was intoxicating. I turned instead to the Korean executives, who were watching with barely concealed fascination. Ms. Lee had dropped her pretense of not speaking English, her eyes sharp with interest. Mr. Kim and Mr. Park exchanged glances that suggested this was far more entertaining than whatever proposal they'd come to hear. Mr. Kim, Mr. Park, Ms. Lee, I said, my voice carrying the authority I'd hidden beneath years of artificial submission. I apologize for the confusion. Shall we discuss the real business proposition? I believe my husband's presentation, while enthusiastic, lacks certain essential details about our property holdings in Seoul, our partnership with the Tanaka Group in Tokyo, and the development rights we hold in Singapore. Mr. Kim's eyebrows rose slightly, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him all evening. You have holdings in Seoul? 3 commercial properties in Gangnam, 2 in Myeongdong. All purchased through V. Monroe Holdings over the past 18 months. I pulled out my phone, swiping to the property portfolio I'd memorized. Our occupancy rate is 97%, with waiting lists for all premium spaces. Clark made a sound, not quite a word, more like air escaping from a punctured tire. I continued without acknowledging him. Marcus appeared at my shoulder with the iPad, the membership database already open. I took it with a nod of thanks, making a show of scrolling through names while the table watched in silent horror. Let's see, I said, my tone conversational, as if reviewing a grocery list rather than determining social fates. Morrison, current standing, 3 violations for inappropriate conduct with staff. Approved for continued membership despite these infractions. Interesting. Morrison's red face turned purple. Those were misunderstandings. I'm sure they were. I continued scrolling. Blackstone, membership approved after a 2-year waiting period. Your wife Charlotte was quite persistent. 17 letters if I recall correctly. Such determination. Charlotte made a small whimpering sound, shrinking into her chair as if she could disappear through sheer will. Reeves, I continued, attempted to donate $50,000 to expedite membership. When informed we don't accept bribes, your father-in-law threatened to review our license agreements. Creative approach to networking. Reeves's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, his usual nervous laughter completely absent. I set down the iPad and looked directly at Clark for the first time since entering. His face had gone gray, the kind of color that suggested either imminent cardiac event or complete psychological collapse. Clark Hartwell, I said, letting his name hang in the air like an accusation. Current membership status. Under review. Under review? His voice cracked on the words. Marcus stepped forward slightly. We have standards at Meridian, Mr. Hartwell. Members who embarrass their spouses, who describe them as too plain for polite company, who suggest they should stay in their lane. Well, such behavior indicates a character deficit incompatible with our values. Clark's chair scraped against the marble floor with a sound like fingernails on glass as he shot to his feet, his face flushed with a combination of alcohol and desperation. His hands gripped the edge of the table hard enough to make his knuckles white, and when he spoke, his voice carried the forced authority of someone trying to regain control of an uncontrollable situation. Audrey, we need to discuss this privately. Now. I continued scrolling through the membership database on the iPad, not bothering to look up at him. The dismissal was deliberate, calculated to demonstrate the shift in power dynamics to everyone watching. You wanted me to stay in my lane, darling, I said, my voice carrying the same casual cruelty he'd used when delivering those words. This is my lane. It just happens to include every building you've spent 3 years trying to impress people in. Clark turned to Morrison, then Blackstone, his hands gesturing frantically as he tried to salvage something from the wreckage. This is clearly a misunderstanding. I had no idea Audrey had any connection to Meridian. She never mentioned. So you're incompetent? Morrison's voice cut through Clark's stammering. You lived with the owner of the most exclusive club in the city for 4 years and never knew? Clark's face reddened further. She deceived me. She lied about who she was. Or, I said, finally looking up from the iPad, you never asked. You assumed I was exactly what you wanted me to be. Someone inferior who made you feel superior. Someone too plain for your sophisticated world. Charlotte Blackstone chose that moment to attempt her escape. She rose from her chair with practiced grace, pressing a hand to her forehead in a gesture of distress that might have been convincing if her eyes weren't darting toward the exit like a trapped animal. "I'm feeling faint," she announced to no one in particular. "The heat perhaps. I should." "Charlotte," I called out, my voice sweet as honey laced with arsenic. "Leaving so soon? But you haven't told everyone about your Tuesday lunches with my husband." She froze mid-step, her designer heel hovering above the floor. Those Instagram posts were so enlightening. Power lunch with brilliant minds. Discussing futures with someone special. Some conversations change everything. All tagged at Meridian, all during Clark's supposed client emergencies. I pulled out my phone, the screenshots Janet had taken already loaded. 12 photos over 6 months. "Your husband David is still in Tokyo, isn't he? He returns tomorrow, I believe. I'm sure he'd be fascinated to hear about these business discussions." The sound Charlotte made wasn't quite a word, more like air being squeezed from a balloon. Her husband, sitting 3 seats away, had gone rigid, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and rage in the span of seconds. Blackstone's eyes moved between his wife and Clark with the dawning comprehension of a man who'd been too focused on his phone to notice his marriage dissolving in front of him. "Charlotte." Blackstone's voice was dangerously quiet. "Tuesday lunches? It's not. We were discussing." Clark was helping with. Her explanations tangled and died as she realized there was no innocent explanation for 12 documented meetings her husband knew nothing about. Mr. Kim, who had been watching this drama unfold with the detached interest of someone enjoying dinner theater, cleared his throat delicately. He turned to face me directly, offering a slight bow of acknowledgement. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said in perfect English, abandoning any pretense of needing translation. "Your property holdings in Seoul, they interest us far more than your husband's proposals. Perhaps we could discuss exclusive use of Meridian for our American operations." I replied in fluent Korean, watching Clark's jaw drop. "Of course. Our company is already deeply involved in the Korean market." Mr. Park and Ms. Lee exchanged impressed glances. Ms. Lee pulled out her tablet, fingers flying across the screen as she pulled up what looked like financial projections. "You speak Korean," Clark said, the words coming out strangled. 3 years of lessons while you thought I was at the community college," I replied, switching back to English. "Tuesday and Thursday mornings. You never asked what classes I was taking." I turned my attention fully to the Korean executives, conducting the rest of the negotiation in their language while Clark sat in stunned silence, unable to follow a conversation that was determining his professional future. Within 3 minutes, we'd outlined the framework for a $40 million exclusive partnership that would give their company permanent space at Meridian and first rights to 3 of my commercial properties in Seoul. Morrison tried to interject something about the existing proposal from Hartwell and Associates, but Mr. Kim dismissed him with a polite but firm gesture. "We prefer to work with partners who value transparency," Mr. Kim said, looking pointedly at Clark, "and who understand that respect in personal relationships reflects on professional capabilities." The deal that Clark had spent 6 months pursuing, the one that would have secured his promotion to managing partner, evaporated in less time than it took to serve dessert. I stood, smoothing my dress with deliberate calm, and looked down at my husband one last time. "Marcus," I said, and the general manager stepped forward immediately. "Please process Mr. Hartwell's membership termination tonight. Effective immediately." "No." Clark's protest came out as almost a shout. "You can't do this. I pay $40,000 a year for that membership." "Paid," I corrected. Past tense. "Your final statement will be prorated through today." "This is vindictive." This is business," I interrupted. "The same kind of business you've been conducting while telling me I was too plain to understand it." Marcus pulled out his phone, typing quickly. "Security will meet you at the locker room if you have any personal items to collect, Mr. Hartwell. Your access has been revoked as of," he checked his screen, 9:47 p.m. The partners who had spent the evening celebrating Clark's success were now physically backing away from him, their bodies angling toward the door as if his failure might be contagious. Morrison had actually taken 3 steps backward. Blackstone was still staring at his wife with undisguised fury. Reeves had somehow managed to edge himself almost entirely out of the room. Philippe, the photographer who had been documenting Meridian events for a decade, moved through the chaos with practiced invisibility, his camera capturing every moment. Clark's devastation as he realized his world had collapsed. Morrison's desperate attempt to distance himself from his protégé. Charlotte's tears as her husband gathered his coat and left without a word. The Korean executives shaking my hand with genuine respect. And through it all, I stood at the head of the table in my grandmother's diamonds, no longer plain, no longer hidden, no longer willing to stay in any lane but my own. Gentlemen, I said to the room at large, though most were already fleeing, I believe dinner has concluded. The Churchill room emptied within minutes, executives fleeing like rats from a sinking ship, leaving behind half-eaten meals and abandoned dignity. I remained at the head of the table, watching the exodus with the detached calm of someone who had already won the war. Marcus stood beside me, hands clasped behind his back, witnessing the aftermath of what would become Meridian legend. 3 days later, I sat in the office of Howard Nathanson, the attorney my grandmother had trusted with her empire, watching Clark sign divorce papers with a hand that trembled slightly. He looked smaller somehow, sitting across from me in a suit that hung looser than it had a week ago, his face carrying the hollow look of someone whose entire identity had been stripped away. The prenuptial agreement he'd insisted on before our wedding lay between us, the document he'd presented with such pride, explaining how it would protect his future earnings from a spouse who might try to take advantage. He'd never asked if I had assets to protect. The irony wasn't lost on either of us now as he signed away any claim to my $80 million inheritance. The apartment contents are specified here, Howard said, sliding another page forward. Mr. Hartwell retains his clothing, personal electronics, and the furniture he brought into the marriage. Clark's jaw tightened at the word retains, as if keeping his own belongings was some kind of concession I was granting. He signed without reading, past the point of fighting for anything. I have an offer, he said quietly, not meeting my eyes. A small firm in Boston. They don't care about what happened. Good, I said, meaning it. Despite everything, I didn't want him destroyed completely, just removed from my life and properly humbled. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. Did you ever love me? I loved who I thought you were. You loved who you thought I should be. Neither of us loved who we actually were. He left without another word. The last time I saw Clark Hartwell, he was loading boxes into a U-Haul while our neighbors pretended not to watch, the story of his public humiliation having spread through every social circle that mattered. Mrs. Patterson from 4B actually brought out lemonade for the other residents who had gathered to witness his departure, turning his moving day into an impromptu block party. That afternoon, Janet insisted on taking me to lunch at Meridian to celebrate. Walking through those doors as myself, not pretending to be anything other than the owner, felt like breathing freely for the first time in years. The staff didn't quite know how to act. Some bowed, others applauded. Thomas the valet actually wiped tears from his eyes when he saw me. We sat in the main dining room, not the Churchill room with its recent memories, and Marcus personally selected a bottle of champagne from the cellar. Dom Perignon 1996, he announced with ceremony, presenting it like a sacrament. That's a $3,000 bottle, I protested. It was your grandmother's favorite, he replied. She could never afford it during her secretary years, but she bought a case the day she closed on Meridian. She said someday her granddaughter would drink it in celebration. Janet raised her glass once Marcus had poured, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I have a confession, she said. I've known about your inheritance all along. The champagne glass paused halfway to my lips. What? Grandma Vivian told me in the hospital those last weeks when you were at work and I'd sit with her during the day. She made me promise to watch over you but never tell you about the money. Audrey needs to learn this lesson herself, she said. Being underestimated is only a weapon if you learn how to wield it. I thought about all those moments when Janet had bitten her tongue, watching Clark diminish me, knowing I could buy and sell him 1,000 times over. That must have been torture. The hardest thing I've ever done. But she was right. You had to discover your own power in your own time. We toasted my grandmother's memory with champagne she dreamed of drinking when men called her sweetheart, and asked her to fetch coffee while stealing her ideas. Over the following months, I reshaped my life on my own terms. I kept our small apartment but bought the entire building, not for profit but for purpose. The Vivian Monroe Foundation's first project converted it into affordable housing for women leaving bad marriages, women who needed what I'd had, time to discover their own worth. I still shopped at Target when the mood struck, still clipped coupons from the Sunday paper because my grandmother taught me that wealth without wisdom breeds poverty. The habits of frugality she'd instilled weren't about need anymore but about remembering where power truly comes from, not from money but from understanding value. When I walked into Meridian now, everyone stood. Not from fear or obligation but from genuine respect. I'd earned my place through revelation rather than inheritance. At business forums where I spoke about property development and women's economic independence, young women took notes while their bosses tried to pretend they hadn't dismissed me as Clark's plain wife at dozens of events. Morrison approached me at one such forum, his face carrying the permanent flush of embarrassment it had worn since that night in the Churchill room. "Mrs. Hartwell, I want to apologize again for—" "Stop," I said. "You've apologized 17 times by my count. Either mean it and change or stop saying it." He nodded and scurried away, but I noticed later that he'd promoted 2 female associates that week. Charlotte Blackstone disappeared from the social scene entirely after her husband filed for divorce. The last anyone heard, she was working at a boutique in Connecticut, selling handbags to women who didn't know her history. Her replacement at various charity committees took careful notes whenever I spoke, having learned the value of paying attention to quiet women. On the first anniversary of my revelation at Meridian, I finally opened the envelope my grandmother's lawyer had given me with strict instructions to wait until I understood. The paper inside was thin, her handwriting shaky but determined. "My dearest Audrey," it began, "being plain is not about faces or fashion. It's about letting others reveal themselves while you build your empire in silence. They never see us coming because they never truly see us at all. Men like your Clark. And yes, I knew what he was the moment you introduced him. They mistake visibility for value. Use their blindness. Build your power. Then stand in your truth and watch them kneel." At the bottom, in writing so shaky I could barely read it, "Piss, that Clark is an ass. Destroy him beautifully." I had the letter professionally framed and hung it above my desk in the V. Monroe Holdings office, where every visiting executive could read it. More than one had stood before it, color draining from their face as they wondered who in their life they might have underestimated. The frame shop owner, a woman in her 60s named Dorothy, had read it while mounting it and said quietly, "Your grandmother sounds like someone who understood the long game." She understood that being underestimated was just another form of armor, I replied. Dorothy smiled. "The best kind. The one they never see until it's too late." Now, a year later, I stand in that same office, looking out at the city my grandmother conquered in silence and I now rule openly. Being plain was never about beauty. It was about being invisible enough to see everything while revealing nothing until the perfect moment. Clark had been right about one thing. I was too plain for his world. But his world was small, built on appearances and approval. My world, my grandmother's world, was built on patience, power, and the perfect moment to reveal that the plainest faces often hide the sharpest minds. If this story of calculated revenge left you absolutely speechless, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Audrey walked into the Churchill room and everyone stood for the plain wife Clark had dismissed. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more incredible stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.